I used to believe silence was a sign of weakness. I thought that if someone wronged you, you had to fight back, scream, defend yourself, or else you'd be seen as fragile and powerless. That's what the world teaches you, doesn't it? That only the loud survive. But life has its own way of teaching lessons. And I learned that sometimes the loudest voice in the room isn't the one shouting. It's the one that stays quiet, watching, waiting, and letting the truth do the talking. My name is Aisha, and this is the story of how my silence destroyed someone who tried to destroy me. 3 years ago, my life felt almost perfect. I had a stable job, a comfortable routine, and dreams that kept me awake at night with excitement. I worked as a content manager at a growing media company, surrounded by creative people who lived and breathed ideas. I was ambitious, but quiet. The kind of person who believed in letting results speak louder than words. I didn't play office politics. I didn't compete for attention. I just worked hard and stayed in my lane. People often said I was too nice, too soft for the corporate world. But one person never said that. My manager, Sarah. She was confident, bold, and respected by everyone. When she spoke, people listened. When she walked into a room, conversations paused. I admired her, truly. She was everything I wanted to become. Strong, successful, unshakable. Sarah had trained me from the very first day I joined. She guided me through projects, taught me how to deal with clients, how to handle deadlines without breaking down. She was patient and kind, always ready to help. I remember her words so clearly. You remind me of my younger self, Aisha. Loyal and hardworking. I wore that line like a badge of honor. I trusted her completely, the way a younger sister trusts her elder one. She often invited me for coffee after work, where she'd talk about life, ambition, and how to survive in a ruthless industry. I used to listen with wide eyes, soaking up every piece of advice she offered. I never realized that behind her charming smile and confident tone, there was something darker, something I couldn't yet see. Looking back now, the signs were there. The slight hesitation in her voice when someone praised my work. The forced smile when the director noticed my ideas. The way she'd interrupt me, mid-sentence during meetings, and finish my points as if they were hers. But I ignored it. I didn't want to believe someone I respected could ever see me as competition. To me, she was a mentor. To her, I was a threat slowly rising in her shadow. But at that time, I was blind to it. I was simply grateful. Grateful to have a boss who cared. Grateful for the opportunities. Grateful for the little world I thought was safe. I didn't know that the same person who taught me to rise would be the one trying to pull me down. It's strange, isn't it? How betrayal never comes from enemies. It always comes from the people you'd never suspect. The ones you let get close enough to hurt you. And I was about to learn that lesson in the most painful, unexpected way possible. As months went by, things started to shift in ways I didn't immediately notice. My work was getting attention, real attention. I was leading campaigns that performed better than expected, and clients were mentioning my name in their feedback. Even Mr. Kamal, the company's director, began recognizing me directly during meetings. For the first time, I felt like I was finally being seen for what I was worth. But with every bit of recognition I earned, Sarah's tone changed. Slowly, subtly, but unmistakably. Her once encouraging voice now carried an edge I couldn't quite explain. She'd say things like, "Don't let success get to your head," or, "You're still learning. Aisha, don't rush to prove yourself." It sounded like advice, but the warmth in her words was gone. At first, I convinced myself she was just being protective, maybe even cautious on my behalf. I respected her too much to doubt her intentions. But then, little things began happening, small enough to overlook, yet strange enough to sting. She stopped copying me in important client emails, meetings where my presence was crucial. somehow went on without me. When I'd ask, she'd simply say, "Oh, it was just a quick discussion. Nothing major." But it was major. I could feel it. When a campaign I had designed went viral, a client sent a long appreciation email addressed to me. Sarah replied to it before I could, saying, "We're glad you loved our team's effort. No mention of my name, no acknowledgement, just we." The first time it happened, I shrugged it off. The second time, I felt a quiet ache in my chest. By the fifth time, I knew exactly what was going on. The office started feeling colder. People who used to greet me with smiles now seemed distant. Conversations paused when I entered the room. My teammates stopped asking for my input. I'd catch whispers behind my back. Muffled laughter, the sound of my name followed by silence. Then came the rumors that I was too ambitious, that I wanted to replace Sarah, that I'd started taking credit for work others had done. It was ridiculous. I never even imagined replacing her. She was my mentor, but somehow she had turned that admiration into ammunition. I remember sitting alone during lunch breaks, wondering where I'd gone wrong. I replayed every conversation, every joke, every compliment I'd given her, trying to find the moment I crossed a line I didn't even know existed. And then, one morning, the floor beneath me collapsed. Mr. Kamal called me into his office. His usual friendly tone was gone. His expression was stern, unreadable. "Aisha," he said flatly, "I've received several complaints about your attitude. Some of your colleagues claim you've been rude and dismissive, and that you've been taking credit for their work." For a second, I thought he was joking. My heart pounded so hard it drowned out his words. "Sir, that's not—" I tried to explain, but he raised his hand. "I'm disappointed," he said. "You're a talented employee, but I can't ignore multiple complaints. You're suspended for a week while we investigate." The room spun. I couldn't breathe. My throat tightened, and I felt my body go cold. I'd never been in trouble at work before, never even received a warning. And now, suddenly, I was being suspended like some kind of fraud. As I walked out of his office, I caught sight of her through the glass door. Sarah. She stood there with a hand on her chest, pretending to console a worried coworker. But behind that fake sympathy, I saw it. The tiniest, satisfied smirk, tugging at the corner of her lips. In that moment, I realized the cruel truth. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a setup. And the woman I had once trusted, like an older sister, had just planted the seeds of my downfall. That week felt like a slow, silent punishment. The office that once felt like a second home now felt like enemy territory. My name was no longer spoken with respect. It was whispered behind cupped hands, followed by smirks and pitying glances. Every time I walked past a group of colleagues, conversations would die mid-sentence. Laughter would fade into an uneasy quiet. My phone barely buzzed anymore. The co-workers who used to message me about projects, lunch breaks, or weekend plans had vanished. Even the few who called themselves my friends didn't pick up when I reached out. I'd stare at my screen, watching message seen with no reply, realizing just how quickly people distance themselves from someone marked as trouble. Every night, I cried quietly into my pillow, trying to make sense of it all. I kept replaying every moment with Sarah, every word she'd said, every compliment, every smile. How could someone I trusted so deeply twist the truth so cruelly? I kept searching for signs I had missed. Some clue, some shift in her tone that should have warned me. But all I found was the same question echoing in my mind. Why would she do this to me? When the week of suspension finally ended, I returned to the office determined to put everything behind me. I thought maybe things would go back to normal. But the moment I stepped in, I realized nothing would ever be the same again. My desk had been moved to the far corner, near the storage room, away from my old team. My access to project folders had been restricted, And the final blow, the project I had built from scratch, the one I had spent sleepless nights perfecting, was now being led by Sarah. She was the new project head and, as I later learned, now reported directly to Mr. Kamal. I sat there quietly, staring at my new workstation. My nameplate looked smaller somehow, like even the company wanted to shrink my presence. Sarah walked by that morning, pretending not to notice me, but she made sure to talk loudly enough for me to hear her say to someone, "We have to be careful with communication now. You know how some people take things too personally." I didn't react. I wanted to, but I didn't. That day, I realized something painful, but freeing. If I tried to defend myself, I'd lose. She had already written the narrative. Aisha was emotional, unstable, and difficult to manage. Anything I said would sound like a guilty person trying to clear her name. So I made a decision that even surprised me. I chose silence. No more explanations. No more confrontations. No desperate attempts to make people believe me. I smiled politely when spoken to, thanked people when they dismissed me, and focused on my work. On the outside, I looked calm, maybe even indifferent. But inside, I was watching, listening, learning. I began noticing patterns. Sarah's meetings often didn't match the reports she filed. She made promises to clients that didn't exist. She quietly shifted credit in group chats, altering messages before forwarding them to management. And every time she slipped, I took note. Dates, details, witnesses, screenshots. I became invisible. And in that invisibility, I found power. She thought she had silenced me, but what she didn't realize was that silence was my strategy. While she was busy performing, pretending, and manipulating, I was building something stronger than words. I was building proof. My silence started to unsettle her. She had expected me to lash out, to get defensive, to break down and prove her right. That's what manipulators count on, your emotions becoming their weapon. But I refused to give her that satisfaction. Instead, I became what she least expected. Invisible, calm, and quietly dangerous. I stopped reacting to her little provocations. When she took credit for my ideas in meetings, I didn't argue. When she made snide remarks disguised as advice, I smiled and said, "You're right. It wasn't weakness. It was calculation." Every word I didn't say became part of a strategy she couldn't read. And in that silence, I began to see everything clearly, without the noise of defending myself. I noticed patterns others missed. Sarah was always 2 steps ahead in meetings, not because she worked harder, but because she knew information she shouldn't have had access to. She often referenced client reports I hadn't shared yet, or preempted issues before they even surfaced. Then I started watching closely. Where she went, who she met, how she communicated. That's when I discovered something even darker. Sarah wasn't just stealing credit. She was using company resources for her own benefit. She had built a side network of clients from our company's portfolio, secretly offering them consulting services for personal payments. I found traces of it, subtle at first. Invoices labeled differently, unusual email addresses, late-night messages sent from her company account to personal domains. She was clever, but arrogance always leaves fingerprints. For months, I collected everything quietly. Screenshots of her emails, voice notes where she contradicted her own statements, messages where she promised clients results that never matched our official timelines. I backed up every piece of evidence in a private folder, organized by dates and details. Every lie she told became a brick in the wall I was building, one that would eventually collapse on her. But through it all, I never spoke a word. Not to my coworkers, not even to my closest friend outside work. I understood now. Silence made people underestimate me, and that was my greatest weapon. While she flaunted her authority, I rebuilt my image quietly. I started volunteering for side projects, helping the IT department with minor tasks, fixing communication errors no one else wanted to bother with. Slowly, people started noticing me again, not as the troublemaker Sarah painted, but as the dependable person I had always been. The IT team especially grew to trust me. They saw how I handled pressure without complaints, how I owned my mistakes instead of deflecting blame. Without realizing it, they gave me access to internal audit files, old records, and logs, things Sarah probably never imagined I'd see. And then one ordinary afternoon, everything changed. I was reviewing some archived campaign folders on our shared drive when I stumbled upon a document left open, an email draft. It wasn't mine. It was from Sarah. The subject line read, "Proposal for independent consulting. Confidential." Curiosity made me read it. My hands trembled as I scrolled. It was a full business pitch, addressed to one of our long-term clients, offering her personal freelance services under the table. She even used the company's templates and pricing models, pretending it was an authorized external collaboration. My heart pounded as I realized what I was holding. This was it, the smoking gun, the undeniable proof that her lies weren't just personal attacks. They were corporate fraud. I took a deep breath, captured every piece of it. Screenshots, metadata, timestamps. Then I quietly closed the file. No confrontation, no dramatic scene, just silence. Because now I didn't need to speak. The truth would do it for me, in its own time. And from that moment forward, I stopped feeling like a victim. I was no longer the girl who had been betrayed. I was the woman patiently crafting justice, one silent move at a time. The annual performance review meeting was always the grand event of the year. The day when the company celebrated its brightest stars. People dressed up more than usual. Smiles felt wider, and ambition hung thick in the air. I went into that hall with no expectations. I had already accepted my position in the shadows. Recognition wasn't something I was chasing anymore. Not after everything that had happened. Sarah, of course, was in her element. She was glowing in a new designer suit, standing confidently among the senior managers, laughing a little too loudly, and pretending to be modest when people complimented her. I could hear her voice from across the room saying, "It's been a tough year, but I carried the department through it. We did what we had to do." I sat at the back, quietly sipping my coffee, watching her play her part. The same woman who had spread lies about me, who had sabotaged my work and manipulated everyone around her, was now about to be rewarded for it. There was something poetic about that. The calm before justice, when her name was announced for Best Manager of the Year. The applause was deafening. People stood, clapping and cheering. She walked up to the stage with that flawless fake humility she'd mastered so well. She held the golden plaque like it was proof of her worth and said into the microphone, "This award isn't just mine. It belongs to my amazing team." The audience cheered again, but behind that applause, I saw it. The same arrogance that had blinded her for months. She truly believed she was untouchable. I didn't clap too hard. I didn't frown either. I simply smiled, because I already knew what was about to happen next. And it wouldn't be long before that fake smile of hers faded. A week after the ceremony, a ripple of chaos spread through the office. The company had received a formal complaint from one of our biggest clients. They were furious. Apparently, a manager had contacted them privately, offering personal consulting services, using company materials. The client thought it was some kind of authorized extension of our business, until they realized it wasn't. The IT department was tasked with investigating the breach. They traced the communication trail, emails, and shared documents, and as fate would have it, every digital footprint led straight back to one person, Sarah. When the news reached management, the building's atmosphere changed overnight. The laughter, the casual chatter, even the energy in the air, it all vanished. Meetings were held behind closed doors. HR moved with urgency. Sarah's name, once celebrated, was now whispered in a different tone. I kept my routine normal, working quietly, submitting reports, keeping my head down. But inside, I knew the storm had finally arrived. When Sarah was confronted, she did exactly what I expected. She denied everything. She tried to manipulate the situation just as she always had. She blamed miscommunication, accused others of sabotaging her, and even cried in front of HR. But this time, her words meant nothing, because this time, the evidence didn't come from gossip or emotions. It came from her own hands. The emails she wrote, the contracts she altered, the client records she manipulated, and every one of those documents was sitting in HR's inbox, carefully compiled and time-stamped. The same proof I had collected months ago, quietly, patiently, while pretending to be invisible. I didn't have to say a single word. I didn't even have to show up in the meeting where she was questioned. The truth did all the speaking for me. For months she had used lies as her weapon. But now, truth was the blade that cut deeper than she could ever imagine. I sat at my desk that evening, looking at the reflection of the city lights through the office window, and for the first time in a long while, I took a deep breath that didn't hurt. Justice was coming, and I hadn't needed to scream for it. All I had to do was wait. When the truth finally surfaced, it didn't whisper. It roared. It tore through the office like thunder on a clear day. Impossible to ignore, impossible to contain. For months, everyone had walked around under the illusion that Sarah was untouchable, that she could do no wrong. But when the mask cracked, it shattered completely. It started with a quiet message from HR calling her into a private meeting. No, one thought much of it at first. She'd been summoned before for important discussions, but this time felt different. Her usual confidence was gone. The tapping of her heels in the hallway sounded heavier, slower, and when she came out, her face said everything. Pale, stunned, eyes darting around like she was searching for an escape that didn't exist. By the end of the day, an email hit everyone's inbox, effective immediately. Sarah has been terminated due to a serious violation of company policy. No fancy phrasing, no attempt to soften the blow, just a clean, sharp statement, the kind of truth that leaves no room for denial. Within minutes, the office was buzzing. The same people who had once whispered behind my back were now whispering about her. Only this time, the rumors weren't twisted lies. They were facts. Real, cold, undeniable facts. I watched the wave of shock ripple through every desk, every chat group, every conversation at the coffee station. Some were stunned. Others pretended they always suspected something. But I stayed quiet, working as if nothing had changed, because I'd already lived through the chaos once, and I had no desire to relive it. Then came the part I didn't expect. People began approaching me, the same ones who had looked away when I was drowning. They came with awkward smiles, nervous laughter, and apologies that sounded both genuine and overdue. Hey Aisha, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for believing what she said back then. I should have known better. I didn't realize how bad it really was. Each word carried a mix of guilt and relief. Guilt for not standing up. Relief that the truth had finally cleared their conscience. I didn't hold grudges. I didn't have the energy for that anymore. So I just nodded, thanked them, and went back to work. But the most unexpected moment came when Mr. Kamal, our department head, called me into his office. He looked different from the usual stern version of himself. His voice was softer, his tone humble. He said quietly, Aisha, I owe you an apology. I should have listened to you before. You didn't deserve what happened. For a moment, I just stood there, absorbing the weight of those words. Months ago, those same words would have felt like victory. But now, they didn't. They felt like closure. I smiled slightly and replied, "It's okay, sir. Sometimes silence speaks louder than defense." He nodded, almost in disbelief at how calmly I'd handled it all. But that was the point. I didn't need to fight anymore. The battle had already been won. Not through shouting, not through revenge, but through patience, truth, and restraint. As I walked back to my desk, a quiet sense of peace settled over me. Not the loud, triumphant kind. The kind that comes after a storm has passed, when the air is clear and everything feels lighter. It wasn't victory that I felt that day. It was freedom. Freedom from lies, from doubt, from the need to prove myself to people who were never listening in the first place. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was simply at peace. In the weeks that followed Sarah's downfall, the entire atmosphere at work felt different. Lighter, calmer, almost as if the walls themselves were relieved that the tension had finally lifted. People smiled more. Meetings ran smoother. The constant undercurrent of fear and manipulation that Sarah had thrived on was gone. Then came the announcement, short, formal, and powerful. Effective immediately. Aisha is promoted to department lead. I read it twice, almost in disbelief. Not because I didn't think I deserved it, but because I'd learned not to expect fairness from a system that once failed me so completely. But this time, justice didn't need noise. It arrived quietly, wrapped in recognition and respect. My new team congratulated me warmly. There were no fake smiles, no forced compliments. They genuinely respected me, not out of fear, but out of trust. And that trust was everything. I led differently from Sarah. I encouraged, listened, gave credit where it was due. I made sure no one would ever feel as unseen as I once did. Every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about the past, about how easily someone's lies had almost crushed my career, my confidence, and my peace of mind. But then I'd look around and see how far I'd come, how everything that was meant to break me had quietly shaped me into something stronger. One evening, as I was finishing up a report, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a message from Sarah. It said, "You destroyed me without saying a word." For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. There it was, her final attempt to make herself the victim, to twist the truth one last time. But I felt no anger, no satisfaction, no need to respond, because she was right in a way. I did destroy her, but not through deceit, not through revenge, not through cruelty. I destroyed her with silence, with patience, with truth. I locked my phone, took a deep breath, and walked out of the office. The evening air was cool, and the city lights shimmered like distant promises. I finally understood what peace truly felt like. Not the kind that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from knowing you didn't lose yourself while fighting back. Because revenge doesn't always mean shouting the truth. Sometimes it means standing so still that the lies crumble on their own. And that's exactly what I did. Now, when people ask me why I didn't defend myself, why I didn't shout, argue, or expose Sarah the moment she started tearing me down, I smile, because I finally understand something most people never do. Not every battle needs noise. I tell them, words can be twisted, intentions can be questioned, but silence has a power people fear. Silence makes liars nervous. It forces them to fill the air with their own guilt. It makes truth echo louder than any accusation ever could. My silence wasn't weakness. It was strength in its rawest form. It was the patience to wait until the storm passed. It was the calm confidence that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, would eventually rise. Because when you stop reacting, you stop feeding their power. You let them reveal who they really are. And that's the most brutal justice of all. Looking back, I realize I didn't just protect my career. I protected my peace. I learned that revenge doesn't always have to be loud, dramatic, or cruel. Sometimes it's quiet, graceful, and unshakably fair. In the end, my silence became my weapon. My patience became my proof. And the peace that followed, that was my victory. Yes, my silence was my sweetest revenge.